All right, hey everybody, how's it going? Brian Sanishin here with the Game Audio Company Academy, and today we're going to talk a little bit about harmony. Okay, so for many of you, you're just starting out in your compositional journey, and you go on YouTube or you go on Google and you look up music theory, and that immediately becomes an incredibly overwhelming, very intimidating place to start. Okay, while there are a lot of really great resources out there, a lot of what is there, like I said, is very, very intimidating. There's lots of jargon, there's lots of rules, there's lots of you have to do things this way or you have to do things that way. And it becomes sort of like a cognitive overload. It's just way, way, way more information than we need to actually really get going, right? And in a lot of ways, people approach this idea of harmony sort of like you would studying for a high school calculus test, right? Here are all the rules, you practice the formulas, and so long as you remember all the rules and you remember all the formulas and you do it all right, then you are going to be successful. Excuse me. And that really is just simply not true. It's not that complicated, right? So we're going to reframe your thinking a little bit today about how you think exactly about this idea of harmony, right? And so instead of thinking it about there being rules and more like math, right? We're going to think about it more like mood lighting. Okay. And so today I'm going to work a little bit in trying to show you some strategies and give you some general basic principles to help you sort of elevate your music by implementing some of these concepts of harmony. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So the very first thing that I would like to do is define exactly what harmony is, right? And so in a lot of ways, people tend to oversimplify but also overthink, right? And so essentially, right, harmony is really just when we have two separate pitches playing at the same time. Okay, it could be more than two, right? It could be three. This would be a triad, right? It could be four, right? It could be as many as, I don't know, seven, six, however many notes I have in there, right? And some people tend to think that, well, in order for my music to be good, I really need to have a lot of notes, right? And that's also not true. Okay, so we're going to really try to strip a lot of this back today, and I'm going to give you the things that I think are the most important and the things that you need to be successful and sort of find that creative voice a little bit in your writing. Okay, so here we go. The first thing that you want to think about is at the end of the day, right? Harmony functions more like mood lighting, right? It's there to help define your melody, right? And we're going to talk about melody in a future video, right? But your melody is more like the main character, right? That is the where the story is really being told, right? But it's almost like the difference between if you're reading a book, right? Or if you're watching something on screen. On screen, you get so much more information because you have lighting and costumes and music and like all of these things, right? And there are all these elements, right? And so harmony is sort of like the latter. It's the thing that elevates the story, okay? And it really can add a lot of emotional weight and a lot of emotional depth, right? Now, the way that you approach that, okay, is really up to you, and it depends on the moment that you're trying to implicate, right? What are you trying to say? When are you trying to say it? How much weight is there on something in any given moment, right? One of the things that somebody like John Williams is so masterful at is knowing exactly when to take a chord that doesn't feel like it should be there and putting it in a place to really highlight any specific moment, okay? And so part of the way that he goes about doing this is using the difference between what we call diatonic harmony and chromatic harmony, right? And so if you don't know, okay, diatonic harmony are any chords that exist naturally in the key in which you are playing. Okay, so for example, if I'm in the key of C major, right, here's my key of C major, right? C major is comprised of 7 notes, right? It's all the white keys, so it'd be C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, right? These are all of my notes in the key of C, okay? Now, we would build triads, right, which are the natural occurring chords in the key of C, by using the 3 parts of the chord, which would be a root, which is whatever we call the chord by. So if I'm playing a C chord of any modality, right, of any tonality, it would be C would be the root. Okay. In the case of C major, I have my third, which is E major, so you're going to skip one, play one, right? And then I have the 5th, right, which I'm going to skip one again, so I'm going to skip F, and I'm going to play G, right? So if I play my C major triad, right, there we go. Okay, for some of you this might be really obvious, and for some of you this might be new, right? So I'm gonna try and sort of dance the line between those of you who have some theory knowledge and some for whom this might be very new. Okay, so if I were to stay in the key of C major, right, and I worked my way all the way up the scale using each note as a root note of a chord, right, I would get 7 different chords. I would have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, right? And then that would bring me back to C, okay? This is what we call diatonic harmony, right? So a lot of chords, right? Or excuse me, a lot of chord progressions are rooted in this idea of diatonic harmony, right? So if I were to play a little bit of what I played at the beginning of the video, I'm going to try and get it close, right? Right, that's a C chord to a G and then an F, all major, right? That's diatonic in the key. A minor, G, right? Right, through an E minor, F, G in there, okay? And that sounds fine, right? It's very pleasant sound. It's very satisfying. It feels very grounded, right? That is one of the things about diatonic harmony that is so important and so significant to note, because there are moments that, whether you're scoring a scene in a film, or you're doing a trailer, or it's a sequence in a video game, whatever it might be, right? That if it feels grounded, right? We want to use harmonies that help to light the room, as it were, to do that, right? So we're going to get a little bit more into kind of the idea of, well, how do I know which chord to go to and which chord do I go from, and that sort of thing, because I know for me, when I was in your position, right, when I was first starting out, that was one of the things that I was the most concerned about. It's like, well, how do I know what, I'm at C and then I go to F, well, where do I go from F? What are the rules, right? And I don't want to say that there are no rules and there are things that you shouldn't do, right? But there are certainly some guidelines that we're going to use. But there are a lot more doors and a lot more places to go, I think, than what a lot of people think. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water. All right. So, diatonic harmony. Okay. The sort of sister of diatonic harmony is this idea of chromatic harmony. Okay. Now, chromaticism, when we're talking about chromaticism, we are talking about expanding outside of the notes that exist naturally in the key, right? So we were just talking about the key of C major, right? Right? Or if we want to, use those same notes, and this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, we start on A instead, right? That's actually A minor, okay? Okay, which is touching a little bit on the concept of modes that we'll get to here in a minute. Okay, but if I take those notes in the key of C, okay, I'm not playing any of these black notes. Okay, but if I were to play every note, right, from C to shining C, no, from C to C, right? There are 12 different pitches, right? So we have C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F. There's no sharp note between E and F, right? F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp or B flat, right? In this case, we're going to call it A sharp and then B. Okay, going back down, right? That's when we would use the flat names, right? So we have B, B flat, A flat, G, G flat, F, E, right? Again, nothing between E and F. Okay, E flat, D, D flat, and C. Okay, so what chromatic harmony is, excuse me, is essentially, instead of just using chords that are based around the notes existing naturally in the key, right? I played a wrong note there, right? Okay. Instead of just using notes that exist naturally in the key, we are actually going to base our chords around chromatic pitches instead, right? There's another way of thinking about this is the concept of what we call borrowed chords. So I'm taking chords from other keys, okay? Which that sort of way of thinking about it is the I went to college and I took music theory way of thinking about it. And I'm here to say you don't have to think about it that way. And I know if any of my undergrad Ithaca theory professors see me say this, I'm really sorry, right? But the idea is that, I'm not sitting here thinking when I'm composing, I'm not thinking too much about, the exact detail theoretically of what things are, so much as at the end of the day, and this is the guiding principle for everything in your music, is that if it sounds good, it is, right? It doesn't matter if you know what it is or, any of this nonsense. If you know the jargon, if you don't, I don't want to call it nonsense, right? But if it sounds good, it's good, right? So the idea of chromatic harmony, right, would be, instead of playing, say, C, F, G, and back to C, which would be a 1-4-5 chord progression, right? I might do something like C, E flat, B flat, C, right? And it still sort of circles around and it's finds its way back to C, okay? Right? Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about harmony, we're defined by that first pitch, right? That tonic home bass, right? I'm in the key of C, right? My harmony is eventually going to want to find its way back, okay? And it doesn't matter if we're playing something super poppy, right? Right? Or if we're playing something a little bit more cinematic. Right? You still want it to come home, right? And so this idea of diatonic harmony versus chromatic harmony, right, is sort of where we start to get the flavor, right? So if we look at what I played, at the opening of the video, that is a track that I did for a very dear friend of mine several years ago called The Great Unknown, right? And the first time I played it using only diatonic chords, which is actually a little tough because the melody itself actually sort of takes from these chromatic chords, right? But if I take only chords in the key, this is a G, F, right? So it's just 1, 5, 4 there, right? And then I go back. A minor, so that would be a 6, minor 6. G, 5. That's a little tough, right? Or I can do something like this. Ooh, well that's different, right? So now I have a B flat in there, which is not part of that that harmonic structure in the diatonic harmony, right? I'm playing a G minor chord, right? So I have that flatted 7th. And then I still go to that major 4, right? So without me talking. Okay. And what you can't see in my left hand is I'm using some chord inversions down here. That F chord, I'm going from G up to A, right? Again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. That will be something that we touch on in one of our courses in our Skool community, which we'll talk about at the end of the video. Okay. So again, this is the diatonic version of it, right? Right? This would be using those chromatic chords. Just one of them right now. Right? If I keep going in the diatonic version of it. The chromatic version of it. Flat 6. Flat 7. Right? And there are some chord extensions in there, which again, we're not going to get too much into the weeds of that, right? But you can hear there's a very different sort of emotional context based on what I'm playing. And like I said, the melody is forced to be a little bit different just because I'm sort of taking from those chords, right? But this is one of the things that really starts to open up your music in a lot of ways. It's what sort of harmonies are you using and where are you coming from, okay? So mood lighting, mood setting, right? You don't have to stay in the key, right? Feel free to start to explore a little bit, okay? Now this sort of opens up two more things that I'd like for you to think about, right? And the first one is one that I addressed a little bit at the beginning of the video, and that's the concept of modes, okay? Which some of you, I'm sure, have heard this term before: Dorian, Mixolydian, Lydian, Ionian, whatever they are. There's a whole bunch of them, right? And then there are alterations of those, you know. You don't need to know them, okay? You don't need to know them right now, okay? It is something that down the road, if you wanted to start to familiarize yourself with that a little bit, you should, right? Because, you know, one of the things that you will find really starts to propel your music forward is if you spend, you know, like a week, like, you know, I'm going to learn this sort of Lydian sound. Whatever it is, right? And then you start to listen to a lot of music and you hear moments that Lydian sound is used, right? And so it starts to give you some ideas and ways that you can sort of borrow ways that other composers that you look up to have done things in your own music, right? You know, I don't want you to worry so much about modes, okay? With that said, I'm going to give you the brief sort of what is a mode, okay? And so basically what a mode is if I take the key of C, right? I can use that same set of pitches, right? It's 7 notes, all the white notes from C to B, right? 7 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay? And if I shift and start on any one of those notes and play the same collection of notes, that would be a different mode, right? Right, that would be Dorian. Right, etc. Okay? And if you base your home base around any one of those, your tonic pitch, right, that sort of starts to open up a different harmonic palette as well. And then within those harmonic palettes, there are some other sort of borrowed chords that you can use. Okay. So, you know, again, this is the idea of diatonic harmony, chromatic harmony, and then how do you define where your tonic pitch or your home bass pitch is, right? Using modes. And again, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed right now. I feel like that in and of itself, for me as somebody who, you know, I've been doing this a long time and I have a good concept, it's starting to overwhelm me as the deliverer of this, right? So I'm here to say, don't worry about modes. Don't think that, you know, you need to go out and you need to spend a ton of time learning what modes are. You don't, okay? Because at the end of the day, if it sounds good, it's good. Feel free to experiment first, okay? Experiment, find your voice. If you sit behind the piano or a guitar or whatever it is that you use to write, and you just try to match exactly what everybody else has done and use, you know, these chord progressions that everybody's used and all this stuff, your stuff's going to sound like everybody else's, right? So you should feel like there are no rules. It's okay to break outside of the key that you're in. It's encouraged. It is a very, very standard approach to modern music right now. Okay. So the last thing that I would like to point out is this idea of what we call voice leading. Okay. So if you don't know what voice leading is, I'm going to tell you. Okay. And so that is, if I'm playing a C major chord, excuse me, and I want to go to an F major chord, right? So we have C, E, and G. F would be F, A, and C, right? I would have to slide up to here. And you'll notice that to do that, I moved every single finger. Okay, and that's fine, right? But what if instead I followed this principle, right? I'm going to move the fewest fingers the shortest distance, Let me say that again. I'm going to move the fewest fingers the shortest distance, right? So here's my C major chord, right? Now in my F major chord, right, I know I need an A, an F, and a C, right? Well, guess what? I already have my C, okay? And my E is only a half step away from F, and my G is a whole step away from A, right? So instead of doing this to this, I'm doing something more like this, right? And that feels a little more grounded, right? Let's see, I'll give you another example, right? Here is my C major chord. Okay, let's use a chromatic harmony for this one. Okay, so instead of my C to F, let's do C to E flat. Okay, it's a whole step lower, right? So I know my C major chord, right, has a C, a G, an E and a G, right? C, E, and G. Okay, C, E, and G. Okay, now my E flat chord has an E flat, a G, and a B flat. Okay, so like I just said, we're going to move the fewest fingers the shortest distance, right? So I need a G in both. So guess what? My G is not going to move. My E to E flat, that's only a half step, right? And my C to a B flat would be a whole step, right? So it's the fewest fingers the shortest distance. I only move two, and combined I move them a step and a half, right? So here's my C, here's my E flat, as opposed to this. Okay, so as you're writing, right, and as you start to orchestrate things, and this is, something else that you want to think about, is how are certain notes moving? How are you getting from chord to chord, right? A lot of people get a little stuck in what chord am I playing, right? But they get lost in actually the idea of, well, how exactly am I moving from one chord to the next chord, right? You could write, the most beautiful chord progression in the world, but if you have bad voice leading, it's going to sound, I don't want to say amateurish, but there's going to be something about it that feels like it's missing, right? It should move like butter. It should feel simple and natural. And you play one chord and you get to the next chord and you're like, oh, obviously that's where it was going. Where else would it go? That's the obvious place. Okay. So that's one part of voice leading. Okay. The other thing that you want to think about is, generally speaking, right, especially when we're talking about diatonic harmony, right, notes naturally have a sort of kinetic direction they want to go in, right? So, for example, the note C, that's home base. That is the only note that doesn't feel like it has somewhere it wants to go, right? Whereas the note E feels like it wants to go up, or maybe feels like it wants to go down, right? Another good example would be the seventh, would be B, right? Even just playing it now, not super in context, right? But we've established C. It sounds like it wants to go up, right? And that's not to say that every time you need to follow where the note wants to go. As a matter of fact, sometimes doing the opposite and giving that little bit of surprise helps to elevate certain moments in your music as well, okay? And there is a name for that, and there is a theory professor somewhere on the internet who will certainly tell you what it is, but I don't want to overload you with that, right? So I'm really trying to simplify a lot of this for you, okay? So let's just do a really quick recap of kind of all of what we've talked about in this video, right? So first, your harmony is the thing that gives your music its emotion, right? You can write a beautiful melody, right? And that melody is nice. It's kind of okay, right? But the harmony is the thing that gives it the emotional weight. Okay? So that's number one. Number two is diatonic harmony versus chromatic harmony, right? Are you using chords in the key, or are you taking chords from outside the key? If you don't know what the chords are in the key, just build triads using chords in the key. Okay. Chromatic harmony is anything else, could be anything else. Okay. Modes. Don't worry about them right now. Don't think about it. Don't worry about it. I don't want to say they don't matter, but there are other ways of getting the same sort of modal sound without having to get stuck in what are modes, right? You will learn them. I promise you, you will. Just by living in this world, you will learn what modes are. You don't need to get stuck on them right now. Okay. And then lastly, voice leading, right? How am I getting from one chord to the next chord? What is the fastest, shortest distance there? Move the fewest fingers, the shortest distance. Okay. All right. So at the end of the day, right, voice leading, chromaticism, they're tools, right? You decide how you should use them. You decide what you want your room to feel like. What do you want that lighting? How do you want the lighting to affect the space that you're in, right? And trust your ears more than anything else, right? No amount of theory knowledge in the world can overcome what you feel when you hear something, right? If you are trying to establish an emotion and you play something and you feel it, right? Trust your gut. Don't worry about what the definition is and, what the theoretical things are behind it. Because at the end of the day, it matters what it sounds like, right? Listeners aren't sitting there with a textbook going, well, that wasn't, a plagal cadence. It was blah, blah, like nobody's doing that, right? So you want to make sure that you're really trusting your ears. Okay. So if you're tired of guessing and you want to master some of this stuff with a community of composers and producers, please, I encourage you to join the Game Audio Company Academy on Skool.com. There's going to be a link in the description below, right? We break down a lot of these scary theory things into really manageable chunks, ways that you can actually sit down, open up Logic, open up Cubase, whatever DAW you're in, and start writing tonight. Please join us on Skool. Thanks so much for being here tonight. Have a great night.